Have you ever looked at your grown child and wondered, why do they keep pulling away from me? Why do they act like I hurt them, when all I've ever done is love them the best I could? If that question feels familiar, I want you to know something important right away. You're not alone, and you're not broken. You're human. Many loving, well-meaning parents, especially in their 60s, 70s, even 80s, are quietly carrying around this ache. A sense of confusion, guilt maybe, or even anger. You raised them, clothed them, stayed up sick nights, sacrificed for years, and now they seem distant, cold, or even openly critical of you. And you're left wondering, how can love turn into this? Today, we're going to talk about this. Not with blame, not with shame, but with honesty, compassion, and a little courage. Because the truth is, even though you loved your children deeply, and still do, there may be hidden forces, old stories, and unconscious habits that have shaped how you've treated them over the years. Not out of malice, but because no one taught you how to heal from your own childhood before trying to raise someone else's. Let's start with the most uncomfortable question of all. Why do your children blame you for things you don't even remember doing? Sometimes it's the look in their eyes when you bring up a family memory and they go quiet, or the way they avoid certain topics, or how they flinch when you try to give advice. You might think, why are they so sensitive? I never meant to hurt them. But here's the deeper layer. Most people carry unhealed pain from childhood, including your children. And often, that pain comes from small things that were repeated over and over, like never feeling truly heard, or being expected to meet a certain standard before they were shown affection. Things that, in your mind, were normal. Things that maybe happened to you growing up too. If you were raised by parents who didn't show emotion, who believed that tough love was the only way, or who never apologized, then chances are some of that leaked into how you parented. Not because you were bad, but because you didn't know another way. Here's the thing. Your child isn't just reacting to one thing you said or did. They're reacting to a pattern that was never talked about. Patterns like always being criticized for mistakes but rarely praised, or being expected to be the strong one, or having to suppress their emotions to keep the peace in the family. You might be thinking, but I had it much harder than they did. I protected them from the things I had to survive. And you're probably right, but that doesn't mean they didn't still get hurt. Because emotional wounds don't compare. Pain is pain. And often, what they needed wasn't a perfect parent. It was simply a present one. Let's talk about projection, because this is where it gets interesting. Have you ever felt like your child sees you as someone you're not? Like they're accusing you of things that don't match who you believe yourself to be? That's projection, and it happens all the time in families. When your child hasn't processed their own pain, they may start to blame you for everything, especially things they haven't owned up to in themselves. Maybe they struggle with boundaries, with self-worth, with anger or anxiety. Instead of looking inward, they look at you and say, "You did this to me." But here's the hard part, and I say this with love. Sometimes that projection sticks to you because there's a part of you that hasn't faced your own story either. Maybe you were taught to ignore your own needs, to always be strong, to never cry, never complain, never rest. Maybe you were expected to act a certain way to keep your parents happy. So you learned to wear a mask. That mask says, "I'm fine." That mask says, "I did my best. Now move on." That mask says, "Stop bringing up the past. It's over." But your child can feel the disconnect. They don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be real. To admit you didn't always get it right. To listen even when it's hard. To take responsibility, not out of guilt, but out of love. Many parents in their 60s and beyond live from a role they've played their entire lives. The provider, the fixer, the peacekeeper, the tough one, the silent one. And those roles may have helped you survive. But now, they may be the very thing keeping you from having a close, honest connection with your adult children. So, what can you do? It starts by looking inward, not to punish yourself, but to understand yourself. Ask yourself gently, What role did I learn to play in my own family growing up? Was I the good girl, the silent boy, the achiever, the strong one who never asked for help? Those roles didn't just vanish when you became a parent. They followed you. They shaped how you related to your children. Maybe you expected them to toughen up like you had to. Or you unconsciously passed down the belief that emotions are weakness, or that love must be earned. Again, none of this makes you a bad parent. It makes you a human one. But now, at this stage of life, you have something most younger parents don't: perspective, time, and the freedom to grow without the daily chaos of raising kids. You can begin the journey of becoming not just a loving parent, but a whole one. A parent who listens with curiosity instead of defensiveness, who doesn't interrupt to explain, but pauses to ask, "Tell me more." This kind of change doesn't require you to relive every painful memory or open every old wound. It starts with a quiet decision. I'm ready to understand. I'm ready to show up as my full self. I'm ready to repair what can still be healed. You may be surprised how much power that choice holds. Because the truth is, your children don't need you to have all the answers. They just want to know you're willing to see them, not just as the child you raised, but as the adult they've become. And sometimes that means being strong enough to say, "I didn't get it right back then, but I want to now." It's never too late to grow closer. But it does begin with the courage to look within. When you begin to ask deeper questions about your relationship with your children, not just what they've done or said, but how you might have shown up, you're already stepping into a new level of awareness. That's something to be proud of. Because for many parents, especially those who were taught to just get on with it, reflection is not easy, but it's powerful. Let's take a closer look at something that might be quietly running the show, the roles you've played not just as a parent, but throughout your life. Every family hands down unspoken rules. You may not remember them being said out loud, but you felt them. Maybe it was, "Don't make a fuss," or "Don't talk back," or "Be the strong one." Those expectations shaped how you responded to emotions, your own and your child's. So, what happens when your child comes to you with feelings that you were never allowed to express yourself? Maybe they cry too much. Maybe they get angry, and you don't know why. Maybe they seem to blame you for things you don't even remember happening. When this happens, many parents instinctively go into defense mode. It feels like they're accusing you. It stings. You might say, "I did my best. I didn't have a handbook. You turned out fine, didn't you?" But here's the hard truth, gently said. Your child may not be fine. And their pain doesn't cancel out your effort. It's possible for both things to be true at the same time. You tried your best, and they still got hurt. This is why it matters so much to identify the unconscious roles you may have played in the relationship. Were you the fixer, always solving problems before your child could learn how to cope on their own? Were you the avoider, staying silent to keep the peace, even when something felt off? Were you the one who had to stay strong for everyone else, never letting your own pain show? None of these roles make you bad. But they do shape how your children experienced your love. And sometimes love expressed through a mask can feel confusing or even wounding. This brings us to something important, the idea of the parental mask. As we grow up, we all put on masks to survive. Maybe your mask said, "I'm easygoing, I never get upset," or "I'm always strong, I never need help," or "I'm the caregiver, I put everyone else first." These masks often begin in childhood and continue into adulthood, especially into parenting. They become the version of ourselves we show the world, and often the version we use to protect ourselves from rejection or shame. But here's the catch. Masks are meant to protect, not to connect. When you parent from a mask, your child doesn't get to feel your full presence. They don't see your real fears, your real hopes, or your real heart. Instead, they grow up with someone who is always fine, always strong, always doing, but maybe hard to reach. And over time, that can create distance. Even if you were physically present, emotionally you may have been far away. Not because you didn't care, but because you were carrying generations of expectations that told you, don't show too much, don't need too much, just do your job and keep going. That worked for survival. But it's not how connection is built. Connection requires honesty, vulnerability, the kind of truth that says, I'm still learning how to love better. Some of the most profound healing I've seen happens when a parent says to their child, not with tears or guilt, but with grounded strength, I see now that I didn't always hear you. I thought I was doing right, but I missed some things. I want to understand. That moment can open a door that's been locked for years. Now let's talk about what it means to become a whole parent. A whole parent isn't perfect. They're present. They don't pretend to have all the answers. They're willing to ask better questions. They don't carry guilt like a weight, but they do carry responsibility like a gift. Because when you step out of the old role, whatever it was, you make space for something deeper. You stop parenting from habit and start parenting from intention. You begin to see your child not as a reflection of your success or failure, but as a whole human being with their own story. And you begin to see yourself not just as a parent, but as a full person with the capacity to grow, to repair, and to love in more honest, open ways. That's what healing looks like. Not some big dramatic moment, but small shifts in awareness. A different tone in your voice. A pause before you respond. A willingness to listen instead of defend. And yes, it takes courage. Especially if you grew up in a home where apologies never happened, where emotions were ignored, or where vulnerability was seen as weakness. But here's the beautiful part. You get to break that cycle. You can be the first in your family to say, we don't have to carry this pain forward anymore. We can do it differently. You might wonder, is it too late? My children are grown. We've been stuck like this for years. It's never too late to change your story. Even a single heartfelt conversation can shift the energy of an entire relationship. Even a letter, even a moment where you sit with them and say, tell me what you wish I'd known. Then, just listen. You don't have to agree with every word. But your presence alone can speak volumes. It says, I care more about connection than being right. That's the beginning of transformation. And you'll notice something else too. As you step more into your whole self, not just the parent, but the person, you may start to feel a new kind of peace. Not because everything outside is perfect, but because you've stopped abandoning yourself inside. That's the true cost of living behind a mask. You lose touch with who you are. But when you begin to live more honestly, more openly, even your relationships begin to reflect that. You start to attract more real conversations, more ease, more moments where you and your child are simply there with each other, without defense, without distance. And yes, it may be uncomfortable at first. But it's the kind of discomfort that leads to healing. As you continue to soften toward yourself and toward your children, something subtle but important begins to happen inside you. You start to notice moments when you feel pulled back into old habits. Maybe it's the urge to explain yourself too quickly. Maybe it's the instinct to dismiss what your child is saying because it feels uncomfortable or unfair. Or maybe it's that familiar feeling of being misunderstood, followed by the thought, after all I've done, why am I still the bad one? These moments aren't failures. They're signs that you're becoming more aware. For many parents, especially those who have spent decades putting others first, there's a quiet belief that says, I'm the victim here. The victim of ungrateful children. The victim of changing times. The victim of being judged by standards that didn't exist when you were raising a family. That belief makes sense. It protected you when you didn't have the space or support to process your own pain. But over time, it can also keep you stuck. Stepping out of the victim role doesn't mean denying the sacrifices you made. It means recognizing that staying in that role keeps you from the kind of relationship you actually want now. When you see yourself only as the one who gave and was never appreciated, there's no room left for curiosity, growth, or repair. Becoming a whole parent means letting go of the need to be seen as either the hero or the victim. It means allowing yourself to be human. Someone who loved deeply, tried sincerely, and still made mistakes. Someone who is still learning. And that shift changes everything. You begin to listen differently. Not just to your children, but to yourself. You notice when defensiveness rises, and instead of acting on it, you pause. You notice when guilt shows up, and instead of drowning in it, you breathe and remind yourself that responsibility is not the same as shame. This is what inner transformation actually looks like in real life. It's not dramatic. It's quiet. It happens in ordinary moments. It happens when you choose not to correct your child's memory, even if you remember things differently. It happens when you resist the urge to say, "I did my best," and instead say, "I'm listening." It happens when you let silence do some of the work, rather than filling it with explanations. As this inner shift continues, you may start to notice signs of emotional maturity in yourself. You feel less reactive, less desperate to be understood, more comfortable admitting uncertainty. You begin to see that you don't need your children to agree with you in order to feel at peace. That's a powerful place to stand. Another sign is that you become more honest with yourself about your limits. You stop trying to force closeness where there isn't readiness yet. You learn to respect your child's boundaries, even when it hurts. And at the same time, you begin to set your own boundaries with more clarity and kindness. You may say things like, "I'm open to talking about this, but not if we're attacking each other." Or, "I want a relationship, but it has to be respectful on both sides." This isn't withdrawal, it's self-respect. Many parents worry that if they stop trying so hard, the relationship will disappear completely. But often the opposite happens. When pressure lifts, space opens. When guilt steps back, honesty has room to breathe. And even if the relationship doesn't change overnight, something important still does. You change. You stop measuring your worth by your child's approval. You stop replaying old conversations in your head, wondering what you should have said differently. You begin to feel steadier inside yourself. There's also grief in this process, and it's important not to rush past it. Grief for the parent you thought you were. Grief for the closeness you hoped would come naturally later in life. Grief for the conversations that didn't happen when they mattered most. Let yourself feel that grief. It doesn't mean you failed. It means you cared. What you don't grieve, you carry. What you allow yourself to feel, you can slowly release. As you move through this stage, you may notice that the same situations that once overwhelmed you now feel manageable. A critical comment doesn't shake you as deeply. A period of distance doesn't feel like a personal rejection. You're able to hold compassion for your child's pain without absorbing it as proof that you are a bad parent. That balance is emotional maturity. It's also where real freedom begins. From this place, your relationship with your children may start to feel less like a battlefield and more like a meeting point between two adults. Not perfect, not always easy, but more honest, more respectful, more real. And even if your child isn't ready to meet you there yet, you'll know that you've done the most important work already. You've broken the cycle inside yourself. You've chosen awareness over habit, presence over performance, growth over blame. That choice ripples outward in ways you may not see right away. If this message is resonating with you, I'd love to hear from you. You can share in the comments what part of this story feels closest to your own experience. Sometimes simply naming what we've been carrying brings a sense of relief. If you found this video helpful, please take a moment to like it and subscribe to the channel Strong Elderly Life. We share conversations like this to support emotional clarity, healthier relationships, and a deeper sense of peace in this season of life. Remember, it's never too late to grow. It's never too late to soften. And it's never too late to show up with more honesty and care, both for your children and for yourself. You are not defined by the moments you missed. You are defined by the courage you show now. Here's to living with more understanding, more connection, and more self-respect at every age.